Thank you very much for joining us, Anush. And today's topic is actually one very close to my own country. It's a book, it's a very special book, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background to those who don't know what House of Culture is in general terms. House of Culture is a project that was kind of launched in late 50s by then left or socialist government, French government. And the idea was to democratize the culture and to move away the culture from the big centers like Paris. So what they did is they organized, funded, constructed hundreds and thousands of these houses of cultures, or maison de la culture, pardon my French. And the idea, like I said, was to basically take the culture, the high culture that used to be reserved for capital cities and for more, let's say, by association, wealthier and more educated audience, and to take it out in the, let's say, more rural, smaller, even, let's say, countryside. Now, that was all happening thanks to the initiative of André Malraux, and it was happening in around 59 and onwards. Now, both Anush and I are coming from former socialist countries, me coming from a country that used to be called Yugoslavia, and now it's called Bosnia, and Anush is coming from Armenia. Now, a lot of socialist countries took over this idea of bringing the culture to the, I apologize for this, to bring the culture to the places where you usually wouldn't see it. In this case, let's say rural areas. And so that hence they built thousands of these houses of cultures across the country. I think only in former Yugoslavia, we had like around 1,500. And they would basically take the art from the National Museum, national galleries, and bring it and show it to peasants and workers and so on. And that worked for a while, but then what they noticed is that often the audience which they were targeting, which is this, let's say, less educated, more sort of working class audience, wasn't always responding in a right way to this high culture that was being brought to these venues. And so they made an adjustment, at least in my part of the world, in former Yugoslavia, and they decided to make those houses of culture places where local associations, amateur theaters, and so on would perform, and thus it would be sort of grassroots culture. So in a way, the concept was almost as if it was reversed. Just before handing over to Anush, in Bosnia and Yugoslavia, these houses of culture were so massive, they were huge, well-funded, state-funded, and at some point they were the principal means or the principal venues for in these less populous, small, rural areas. Anyway, so that's sort of a short introduction into what the House of Culture is. And I would like to give a word to Anush and tell us a little bit about this very special book, which is a book that it's handmade and it's made to order. So I'm going to post here a link for everyone. Should anyone like to purchase a copy of it? And Anush, welcome. So can you just, before we get into all the specifics of how this special book is made, can you share a little bit of your experience about these houses of culture compared to what I just said and what the role they had in former Yugoslavia?
Yes. Thank you, Zia, for this introduction. It's very interesting for me. When I was getting ready for this conversation, it really didn't cross my mind, and I completely forgot that you are very familiar with this topic as well, with the houses of culture, because yeah, I mean, for me, this is something that the post-Soviet countries have, but you're right in terms of the post-socialist world as well. So it's interesting to learn also that in the beginning of your conversation, you mentioned that they tried to bring actual art into these houses, because in my knowledge, well, I didn't know about art, but I do know that like theater troupes and dance performances would, when they traveled, this is where they would perform, not only from cities and towns, but also local ones. So this was, these were places for these performances, for exhibitions, but also in many ways for they served educational purposes as well for local children. And yeah, so in the cities, this were rather clubs in in different parts of towns, but the houses of culture were in the villages in our post-Soviet area, in villages, and there was only one in each village. And they were sometimes here they call them like the club, like the village club. Sometimes when I would look for one, this is how I would ask, and they would show me one. So in Armenia, many houses actually do operate. There is some funding, but not directly for these houses, not by the Ministry of Culture, but it's the funding that the local municipality receives, and if they choose to allocate budget to do something with the House of Culture, they will. But a lot of times they don't. So a lot of these houses just stay as they are, and it's also sort of expensive to just destroy them and clean the area. And then other times, they stay with the hope that after all, the head of the village maybe will allocate and will do something about it. So these are the houses that I actually focused on, the ones that are not taken care of, where nothing is happening, but which do in my imagination, in my understanding and feeling, carry this memory of the past.
How many are still functional in whatever capacity, like as in their own, or not in whatever capacity, but in their original, scope and meaning? Like how many are still houses of culture, or yeah, what's the general state of that?
Well, I wouldn't know about the whole post-Soviet space, but I would say in Armenia, probably around maybe 10 to 20% are functioning, while most are just not taken care of because of it being a bit expensive. Not a bit, but pretty expensive. I'll keep this open while we speak so that you can also experience some of the images.
So are you saying that? So are you saying that this original concept of houses of cultures as places of, as the word says, culture, is kind of abandoned, or it's just for lack of funding, or it's just sort of passé kind of approach to the culture?
Yes, that is basically what happens. That is the consequence. The consequence is that culture outside the city is abandoned. Basically, it's centralized again. If the purpose was to decentralize, that has reversed. And now everything is again, in our case, in the capital, Yerevan, in the second largest city, maybe in the third, but rarely in the villages, in the rural areas.
So you mentioned,
and it's not only culture. It's just when a country is going through economical hardships still, all through its independence, the culture is definitely not a priority.
Yeah, that's the same goes for, well, I think it is priority when it comes
also
to
spread.
it is priority
Yeah.
when it comes to defunding the culture and art. But just to get back to the
Yes.
just to go back to the part where you said that you photographed this book on the phone. I mean, with
Yes.
phone camera. I mean, obviously, there are other examples where photographers use phones as a primary camera, uh, like Brown Sugar by Michael Christopher Brown and so on. But I'm just curious, why did you opt for a phone? I'm just curious, why did you decide to shoot it on the phone?
Mm. It was a it was an artistic decision that's sometimes not very straightforward to explain. I wanted the images to be square, and well, my camera doesn't. It of course it can also always be, the images can always be cropped, but the iPhone did have this. The former iPhones have the square crop that came just naturally. It doesn't anymore, and I photographed with it a lot, and I decided to just keep the whole book photographed that way. I did take pictures with my camera as well, the 35 millimeter, not the 35, it's a digital camera. But in the end, in order to keep things consistent, I just kept the images, and most was either way photographed on the phone. So in the end, it all came together this way.
Um,
Mhm.
so so for people who don't know, so the book is entirely made by you, right? You actually obviously
Yes,
conceived the book, photographed the book, designed. I assume you also designed it. You also printed, bind it, and you do the whole process, right?
yes, yes. Hmm.
Would you mind if I, before asking a few questions, do you mind if I share a clip of how the book is made? Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah, this is the website of the book. Yeah, and there I have a few um,
So how, while we're watching
copies.
this, I wonder how long it takes you to create a single copy of the book. Can you put it in
If
hours?
I constantly do it,
Yeah, like
yes, about, if I do it all the time, it will take me a day. Um, and I can describe the process to you as well, what happens, the
let's
way I
just
do it. So
let me
this
just.
is the beginning of it. Yes, this is the beginning of it when I stitched the title, the House of Culture. And my grandmother taught me to do this very easy cross stitch, you know, the thing that it's just easy with these threads called moulinet. And then, yes, I have to use those little squares so that the text is goes on a straight line. And yeah, that's how I then separated. And this material is going to become the cover. It is then put together with cardboard, glued together, and like two pieces, and they become the cardboard.
May I ask, why did you decide to go this way, so to speak,
The cover, sorry.
instead of the
Mhm.
what we like to call traditional way of doing books and chasing the publisher, raising funds
Yes,
one way or the other, and so on. May I ask,
yes,
why did you decide to go this way? I mean, it's obviously, I mean, I
yeah.
love it, and I think it's a beautiful because it becomes an art piece in itself. But I'm just wondering why put yourself every time through this?
Yes, because this the experience of photographing the book, as I told you, was a personal one for me. It just meant everything. It really healed me and brought me back together. Once I completed this body of work, that was around, I think, in 2017 or 18, I realized that if I'm going to make the book, it's going to be a personal experience again. It would need to be. That's how um, everything was coming together. And so I decided to go this way. So everything is done by me, but of course, I print these images on this special paper, which is not really photo paper. It is called newsprint, this type of paper. So the printer is next door. So I print the pages like these are the pages, or you can see me. Yeah. So I'll explain more about the process, but basically the reason is that this was too personal for me to go through a process of doing this through a printing house. But I'm working on a book now that I want to publish in a more, what was the word that you used?
Let's use word conventional.
Conventional way.
Yeah. Would you would you like sharing with us a few favorite shots or whatever you feel like from the book?
Yes. So here I will.
And while you're doing that, while you're doing that,
that,
let me just say to everyone who's here, if you have any questions for Anush or anyone here, please use Q&A box rather than chat room, and then we will convey those questions for Anush. Yes. Okay.
I will start at the beginning. Yes. Yeah, so basically this is the description of the book. It's very short, and the idea is not to do a lot of text. Well, it's not to do a lot of text, but to focus on images. But I do explain how this was a journey through memory, and how it was both in a way it was a bit to raise awareness about the fact that so many beautiful buildings are just left and nothing is happening with them, but at the same time it was something that was a bit of therapy. So this is one of the images that really somehow connects with people usually. And this is a culture house in a pretty large village called Arshaluis, not far, half an hour from the capital, Yerevan. And its hall is just really large. You can see it from the chairs, you can see the dimensions. And then on top, it had this socialist symbols. And this is not very common. Usually the situation is a bit less understandable. Like they usually look a little older, but this one was very large. And then maybe because the village is just a large one, so was the house, but usually they're a little smaller. This one was almost the kind of building that could be in a city, like a big theater, that type of place. And then in some of the houses, there were maybe one or two people. There were libraries. So in this village called Gusana, more in the north of Armenia, only this one room was used as a library, and this woman was the librarian. So the books were all really old from the Soviet times, just as well. Again, a house closer to our third largest city, but this was more of an element of the curtains photographed from outside. These are people who used to work at houses of culture. The woman on the left, it was the director of this house in the village, in a village called Nareg.
Excuse me. I think you're browsing through the pictures, but I don't see it changing on the screen. I keep seeing just the first one you showed. Are you browsing through the pictures?
Yes. You cannot see me change them.
Nope. If you want, I can share it from. I think I have.
Let me try this way. Do you see it?
Now it's going. Now it's going.
Did you see me?
Yeah. Okay. Now it's working.
So in case others didn't see it either, so this was the first image of the large culture house in the village Arshaluis. This is the small library, the only room that's used in this house, and part of a curtain in a culture house in Galadzor village. And these people who were friends, they were not a couple, but the woman on the left was the director of a culture house years ago, and the person, the man was a dance teacher, but rather what they call someone who would direct performances, direct dance performances. And that village also didn't work. And this is also the village Gustana, close to Gyumri, the second largest city. The projectors, these are just parts of projectors in the cinema underground. And the shadow is of my daughter Ella, who was sitting on my shoulders with a bucket of flowers. Yeah, it's just so I had her on my shoulders and I was taking a picture through the window.
What was, I mean, this may be off topic, but not entirely. What do you know? What's the situation with these houses of culture in the Nagorno-Karabakh area? Like, were they all destroyed in the conflict, or do you have any idea what's happening with them in that area? Because it's obviously contested,
yes,
it's always contested, and so on.
Well, it's the same as in Armenia. You know, some of them function, some don't. I photographed remains of a house in Martakert, in one of the larger towns. And really, it was there was not much left, but only the walls, beautiful walls, covered with these mosaics. But and Lenin's head somewhere there in the garden too. But depends, you know. In some places they do operate, they do reconstruct them. So it's a very similar picture to the one in Armenia. Basically, depending on how the local municipality will decide to allocate their budget.
Right.
This person also used to be a head of a culture house, and that house was destroyed not by time, but because of the war, the first Nagorno-Karabakh war. It was close to the border with Azerbaijan. This is another one where I loved the colors. There's always something just so mystical in these houses. It partly operated because I saw little girls running into one of the rooms for dance classes there that day. And so this is the same house that one of the first pictures had the element of the curtain. So this is the same house from inside. So just outside, you can see that to the extent to which they're just not used. This is the house that was destroyed during the war. Yeah, so those are some of the images from the book.
It's just so interesting to see what happened to this massive, at least I know from Yugoslavia, I'm sure it's pretty much everywhere in former socialist bloc, like what happened to this massive intervention and attempt to bring, you know, to bring culture to the places where it wasn't available before, and art. And I'm just thinking, like, how many billions and billions of dollars has been spent into this. I know for a fact that in Bosnia, usually, Sasha, I'm just answering the question, usually the village halls or the town halls were separate buildings, but often, not often, but sometimes, and these were proper cultural institutions. But sometimes when we are talking about smaller places, then they would have the dual function, meaning there would be place, you know, for voting if such thing happened, or like, you know, village meetings, town meetings, as well as cultural, as well as a place for cultural events. Now that's that's how it worked here. I assume it worked everywhere else. So I'm curious what
Yes.
there, if our friends from the Western part of the world, what do they have to say about this? I mean, were you aware about this? I'm just asking the audience. Were you aware of this concept of the House of Culture? I mean, in Eastern Europe, it was a massive, and in France, and for that matter, in Italy, partially, it was a massive, massive movement in the 60s and so on. I wonder what was the counterpart in the West, if there was.
Mm-hmm.
There
Yes.
was. Okay.
So Gabby Breitenbach said absolutely not. Very interesting. And Gabby also said that she'd love to see some pictures. And either way, we were planning to also show some from the book. So this is also, these are just either details or again, the image of Bella here as it was in the PDF. Well, these the way it's printed on this paper, which is called newsprint, it's not very white, the paper, so a bit more into the feeling of something that's archived, something that's not of today, and it's not glossy either. So I wanted to give it that kind of a feeling. This is also an image that you saw. And that is also why the stitch of the book is sort of, I didn't want it to look very contemporary, Zia, like the way you mentioned, because if it was published in a more standard manner, it wouldn't have this feel. And I wanted it to take us back somewhere, not to have anything connected with today. And that's why this stitching, which I learned from my grandmother, that's why the age is sort of always like dropped a little bit, because the house is dropped and abandoned. And the stitch here, it's called a Coptic stitch. It's a very easy one, but it keeps the book really tight together, and the pages never fall apart. And the paper is also not too thick, but not too thin to be like torn. So I'll go through some more of the images. If anyone is interested in the process in more detail, they can write to me and I can let them know. Even in the very beginnings, yeah, I wanted to do the cover out of why the cover is made of velvet, again, because this reminds me of that Soviet time. In the beginning, for the first two books, I found velvet from that time, from 80s and 90s even. Well, 90s is already post-Soviet, but then I realized it was too difficult for me to keep searching for that material all the time, and I just started to buy ordinary like velvet. Again, the library here. There we go. And see, this is a diptych of that same image that I showed, but one closer and one a little farther. I do that a couple of times where I try to show a bit of movement. And the book is a bit less affordable this way because it's handmade. Instead of the usual maybe $50, $60, $70, it's $200. But that's because of the whole effort I take to make it. And then every time someone orders it, I can put my heart into each book. And I can, if I know the person, I can think of them. I usually write a message to the person who ordered. So it turns into this communication, into this additional experience every time I make it. The books are also limited. There are going to be 500 copies. This one is 37 out of 500. Yes, this is a picture about how how a construction starts merging with nature. It's starting to be green and mold. And here I have a bit of text. Nature goes into the house, becomes moss. The house deteriorates, becomes nature, eventually and essentially. About how if we don't do anything about these houses, nature just takes over. So you see, in the process, the project became less informative and again a diptych. This is an image of the same wall, less informative and more about experience in the house. And I even thought of maybe like mapping these houses and inviting people to just go walk through them and experience everything themselves, you know, everything that I could feel emotionally.
So
And this comes if you're alone. This happens if you're alone. Yes.
here's a practical question: is how did you learn how to make books?
How to make it? Well, as soon as I decided to do this, I taught myself how to do it. So first I began with the covers. I decided this, right? That is going to be velvet. And then I asked myself and in general how I'm going to make the cover. And I think for the cover, I probably looked up a tutorial, learned how to put it together with the silicone glue. I don't know if you can see it, but I put it together with cardboard. Okay, so I had the two covers. So that was one thing. Then there was the printing. And at first, my friend in America helped me with it. He printed them and sent them to me. Then I got my printer here now, and I can now easily print them myself. So that's relieving. Why? Because this paper didn't go into any printers here in any like little or big printing houses. So I had to just order a Canon printer myself, a good one, in order for it to print on this thin paper, which is not photo paper. So, okay, I was able to print them. And then there was the layout to figure out. And so I did that, making sure that, let's say that if I want a diptych, but after all, they're not going to be on one spread. So this goes with this one in the beginning to later end up with this. So these are things that people don't usually take care of or think about when they make a book, because it's up to designers, up to the book designer. But yeah, that was something to think about, definitely. And once that was ready, stitching the books together. And so, as I told you, this is just a stitch that I liked. Again, I just looked it up on the internet. It was called One Window, please. Yes, so it was called Coptic stitch. And again, I learned how to do it through this tutorial. I can share it with you, just a YouTube tutorial, very easy one. And this stitch is actually easier to make than it may look. So that's it, you know, and this is the wax thread that I used for it, for this stitch. These are the different versions of velvet. I sometimes have it dark green, sometimes this red cover. It used to be coral. Some tools like this owls, I think that's what they're called, to make the holes before I do the stitching. So all of this I had to learn, and it's a very, very satisfying, very interesting process to actually make the books. And as difficult as it is, I really don't regret this decision, because just every time one person orders it, I go into this 2-day sort of residency of my own. You know, I'm making a book. Well, right now I have one extra, which I pre-made. I made it to take with me to Perpignan to show it around. I always do. Anyway, so this is it, but I don't think I will do this again, because it's just involving. It's really not easy. And right now I told you I'm getting ready for another book, and this time it's not going to be handmade. I'm going through the conventional
Well, I
uh,
mean,
process.
there is no right or wrong way to make a book. I think both ways have its pros and cons. I think with this one, it just takes incredible effort every time, and whatever the price tag, it's kind of hard to how do you say, reconcile the effort you've put in with whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. So yeah, I don't see myself doing that. That's definitely the case. It,
Yes, yes. I was asking myself. This is also one of the when I was trying. It's one of the signatures. But yeah, I was asking that myself too. I said, okay, what if you get tired of making the books? You can't make them forever, after all. But then I realized and remembered that they're not forever. There are 500 of them to be done. So I could maybe take the time and say take 1 month and say, I'm only making books this 1 month, pre-make maybe 20, 30 of them, keep them and sell them, however. So it's possible. It's just a different process. It's a
yeah.
different type of process. But it makes me happy that I can make a special book for every person who orders it. It's something, because every time, I when I connect with people who see my photography, who look through this book, every person is just special. This is the whole purpose of why I photograph. So that's why it all feels so logical, so natural for me to also make this for someone, like I'm making a picture for someone. It's always that purpose, and this serves that purpose just as well.
I'm just gonna share again a little bit of your website so you can see it, so people can see how. Okay, sorry, you've seen that. Just to see bits and pieces of the process and how it actually looks like. I love the way it's the binding is amazing. So what do you, it's a very silly question. What do you use to, how do you say, to penetrate with the needle, the thread? What do you use? You just use your hand,
Here,
or do you have actual tool?
here,
Uh,
yes, I have these tools. They're called owl. I make the holes in advance, and they later, of course, I don't have to make the holes with the needle because it would be very unorganized.
right,
No,
right.
I need to do that in advance so that the paper doesn't get torn. Oh, this is the process of me working.
Again,
Yeah.
I'm gonna sway conversation just a little bit into direction of the Balkans. For those who don't know, something really bizarre has happened to houses of culture during the war in the 90s. There are at least, I would say, 10 cases in Croatia, in Bosnia, also in Serbia and Kosovo, where these houses of cultures were used as execution sites, which sort of brings, and I urge everyone to look around. There's a bit of a literature on that, also translated in English, how these places where performances were done, theater plays, concerts, and so on, in an instance were transformed into places of massacres. And actually, there are, I mean, documented cases where this sort of macabre theater took place in these houses of cultures in Bosnia, where they used the stage as a place where they would sort of, the executions were done in a sort of almost, a horrible thing to say, theatrical way. So it's very interesting conversation how the role of these spaces dramatically shifted in during the war times. And there's also, for again, a horrible thing to say, horrible thing to say, but there was also this insane logic, because in these small cities and villages, those were the only places where you could gather larger groups of people. So like, oh yeah, well, we have this theater or house of culture. Let's just
Yes, yeah.
put everyone there
Club.
and execute. It's just a bizarre twist of fate, of how spaces that were built to spread joy and culture and tradition and so on were turned into execution sites. So I think it's just
Yeah, well, you see, if that's the thing, if you went there, if you were there now photographing these houses inside and just experience them, if you were all alone too, without distractions, I'm sure this would have a very completely different meaning than it did for me. So like this, the memory of a space, right? What we mentioned in the beginning, what it is independently of you or your knowledge about it, and what it is for you on a personal level as well.
yeah.
And then with that as a foundation, you'll create something like photographs there, and then that becomes a memory of its own. But it, depending on what you know about it, and what the creation depends on your knowledge about it. So I'm sure something that you would create would be yeah, very different from what I photographed in these houses. Yeah.
But I think we can definitely say that these houses of culture were incredibly noble attempt to on behalf of the state, or an action from the state to disseminate and democratize culture, which was previously unknown in our parts of the world. And unfortunately, now that when we see this, it's sort of sad to see this go to waste, and I'm pretty sure it's never coming back. So it's pretty depressing. People, if I'm just talking to the audience, if you have any last minute questions for Anush, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer.
I just poked myself with this paper.
You shed blood. You shed blood for this talk. Thank you very much. Okay.
I thought I had the knowledge of how to use them, but I went through all the comments of everyone here in the chat, and really, really thankful. Will they stay or will they go away once we turn this off? Because
it's all recorded, and which
from
means
everybody.
It's all recorded.
Okay, they will be here.
The questions. Well, everyone, thank you very much. Anush, thank you very much for shedding blood for this event and for joining us. And make sure
thank
to
you,
join
everyone, and thank you, Zia.
Make sure to join us next in a almost. Let me share our calendar. So just to give you an idea, what's up next on 7 Insider. I think I'm gonna go quickly. Tomorrow there's in 2 days there's an event with Chris Graves. Then this awesome session between Ilvy and Stefano. It's a great series that she's doing. Then an absolute must. You can't miss a guide to online storytelling by Brian Storm, one of the pioneers of multimedia and online storytelling. And then again, book club with Zalmay, a Swiss Afghan photographer who left Afghanistan when he was, I think, 16, but never stopped working there. And then again, a book club with Ed Kashi. So make sure to tune in. I'm sure you're going to find something interesting for everyone. And I'm going to share again the link to the houseofculturebook.com. And should everyone be interested. Thank you very much, Anush, and everyone. Thanks for joining us, and see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye, Zia. Bye, and thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.